Welcome to this new podcast episode. Today, I'm talking to Amy Armstrong. Welcome, Amy.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So, what I think, because you work in a special field where in general, it's not really connected to the topics I'm normally talking about, but also a part of what you work in the field is closely related to what I'm talking about, right? So, let's go first to the part, and in general, I'm not talking about so people understand what you do most of the
Sure.
time. So tell a bit about your job as a coach and counselor.
Sure. I'm happy to. So, I'm a conflict resolution specialist. And what that means is that I'm grounded in the concepts of personal communication and what creates conflict, the experience we have during conflict, and how to create a better vibe, a better sense of connection with the people with whom we're in conflict. And there's two big categories of conflict. One is people that we're going to have a continuing relationship with, and one is people that we're not necessarily in relationship with, but we have values at stake. So activists, there's obviously a lot of conflict going on in the US around politics. And I like to speak with people around their experience with conflict so that we don't get so frustrated trying to live out our values.
Um, Conflict. It is so,
Mhm.
there's so much conflict going on right now in the world. And at the
Mhm.
same time, we live in one of the safest eras of history. So
Mhm.
it is very difficult to combine those two because there's, if we look at how many people die in this time, it's so much less than we had in the past. But at the same time, when there is conflict, there is so much attention for it in the media that we think it is everywhere and it's the only thing that's happening right now. Um, like the conflict about what's going on in Israel and with the Palestinians.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's an interesting topic because when I talk about the politics in the US, it is very specific to the US. Of course, in the Netherlands, we also see it, but still we don't feel it as much as you do, probably. But if I look at the conflict in Israel, and also if I look at the conflict about climate and stuff, that's all different. But let's first go to this big international conflict. And I
Sure.
see people that I know responding in a way to these videos or news messages that I think, my gosh, why are you doing this? Why are you going there? Because they like approve violence, for example, and that's so far away from my values. How do I stay connected with these people?
Mhm.
And well, I was going to say try to talk some sense in them, but that's not what I mean. But
But
you
it's
know,
how it feels.
yes, yes.
You would love for them to change their mind and say to you, "Oh, tell me more. I'd love to change the way I'm doing things." Right?
Yeah.
That's what we talk to people as if that's what we're looking for, is for them to say, "Oh, thank you for enlightening me. I'm so glad I know now how to have peace." Right? But everyone believes that they're fighting for their values. And no one, I don't believe anyone, that I've seen in the current conflict that is going to say that their value is death, that they just want to see more people die, that they want to see babies go hungry and die. That's not what people are saying. People are fighting for something that is near and dear to their heart. And our job as humans is to recognize what's going on in ourselves that's causing so much angst that actually shuts down the communication with that person. And so my role in conflict resolution is to just play with the values and help people articulate their own values that are at risk. Because when our core values are at risk, our brain really interprets that as danger. It's very interesting that our brain doesn't know the difference between physical danger and emotional danger. So it does feel like we're dying. And of course, with the conflict you're talking about now, in Israel and Gaza, people are dying, right? But the danger really does register as very high in our bodies. There's a lot at stake. It's just that we often treat other people as though they don't have heartfelt values the way that we do.
So the natural tendency is to teach people, to give them more information about the way I feel, what the situation is, and how, what the importance is of what I feel about the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that in general, I believe just results in more resistance.
Exactly. Because we're not creating a connection first, right? So we learn in relationship, right? Look at a young child in school. If that teacher shows kindness to the child, that child can learn anything from that teacher, right? The saying that no one cares what you know until they know you care. How that translates into those of us working with institutions, in highly educated, highly, academic, political arenas, is we don't need a personal level of care. We need to know that you're interested in knowledge, in intellect, in accuracy, in facts. And we need to connect on a level of we are both trying to advance our values here. And there has to be a level of curiosity, openness, respect for an atmosphere of learning. So we resist learning in an atmosphere where we don't get a sense that that other person is interested in learning. Right? So we become skeptical and resistant from someone that we think wants to impose their values, impose their knowledge, and impose their information with no regard for what I, feel the same way about my side. And it's worse the more we judge others for their different values. Right? I've got lots of things I judge, right? When I think of that someone is only interested in money or growing their corporation or gaining political power, I'm going to shut down. I'm not really interested in what they have to say because I don't respect their value. But if I can be aware of that and know that there's even more behind that, they have other values too. What other values are here that we can, form a connection? There's almost always something if we just spend a moment connecting. So I'd love to tell you a quick story. It's very dear. So I had a real luxury recently. I treated myself to a master class on negotiation at Harvard Law School. And I did this for no reason other than my enjoyment. I love that kind of thing where you're just in a little bit of a think tank, just a few days with other people that are interested in negotiation. And we had an exercise to do. And we were put into groups of two, and we went in and we had to, we were positioning ourselves as aid workers, and we were to convince the director of a hospital to give us some help giving vaccines to some children in a refugee camp. but the hospital director wanted those vaccines, right? So we had some competing needs. And the way we were able, my group was able to break through this, is the hospital director had a picture on her desk of some children. And I just glanced down at the picture and I said, "Oh, look at those children. I see you have this picture on your desk." And it just gave a moment for the hospital director to say, "Oh, yeah, those are my nieces that have died from this disease." Right? So instantly we were human beings that cared about children. And we were able to negotiate how we were going to handle, the issue. And so it was all set up, but literally the staff of this masterclass had positioned that picture on the desk just to see if someone would notice that it was a point of connection. And if we can look at people as people with hearts as well as minds, there's something that's going to open the door and will completely change the conversation. And if we can create some type of human to human connection, we're open to learning. If there's no heart connection, we simply are not creating an environment for learning. And it's really tricky when you have a war going on. It's so obvious, right? What the values should be. But everyone is fighting for a cause. And what happens, interestingly, is that we really don't even have to do it all in conversation. We can really do it energetically if we allow ourselves to care about people as people with complicated values. Our approach is different. We come across differently. Just showing a little bit of curiosity and openness in our voice, it does make a difference. And it has to be authentic.
Does that mean that you can do it even when you're not sitting in a conversation across the other person? Can you just do
I
it?
believe it.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So one of the first steps is for us to do our own work of noticing when we're in a heart space, when we're being authentic. Right? So I did a sales training once, and this delightful trainer was helping us see when we shift out of trying to meet a need, and then we shift into the money conversation and we go right from our heart to our head. And she says, as soon as you get up in your head, you've lost them. And so the whole sales training was around how do you stay in your heart space while having a money conversation that's transactional. Same thing when we're teaching about political activism, climate activism. When do we go from our heart to our head? Because that's the point where we lose the connection. And we're not nearly as effective in helping other people learn the facts about what's happening.
In school, well, at least in the last decades, we are being taught in our heads, right? So everything is going into our heads. There's little space and time for our hearts. How would we change maybe education, but in general society, to stay in that hard precision, that hard thinking?
Yeah. Your question is a beautiful one because all the children in school, their hearts are with them. They just have locked doors around them, right? And it takes such a small moment to open the heart space. So I do some work in New York City public schools. I am just delighted. I contract with a beautiful social emotional learning company there called My Robin. And what I teach to these high school teachers that have a classroom full of students that are having difficulty learning, or they're struggling, or they're just dealing with a lot of rumblings of conflict in the school. One of the techniques is for these teachers to make eye contact with a student across the room and have some way of saying, I see you, without a word. Make eye contact. Hold the eye contact for 1 second or 2 seconds, and then go on with your speaking. So it doesn't disrupt the classroom. You don't have to stop what you're teaching. You simply make eye contact with your heart, saying, I see you. It sounds so simple. It is hugely effective. And what happens in those teachers when they're working with me, learning just these seemingly small ways to connect, is the teacher's heart opens, and they actually do learn to be aware of when they're actually seeing the student versus when they're seeing a troublemaker. So we don't have to know what's going on with that student. We just have to show that we're interested in whatever it might be. Maybe they didn't sleep last night, right? Maybe they just had a breakup. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're kind of feeling like they can't keep up. We don't know. It doesn't matter. It's just an I see you. And the more we can see someone and open that heart space just a crack, then we have an entirely different conversation.
I see this. I'm just going from all sides everywhere, because
Yes.
what you're talking about just reminds me of a couple of things. I'm seeing also these doors in front of me opening for a new conversation. But I see this in a similar way to the way that right now, let's say boomers, but I don't really feel that we should box them in. But in general, like say older people like my age, let's put it that way, maybe easier. Looking at younger people coming into the workplace, and they see them like lazy, they see them like very hurtful. You can't say anything to them. They start crying, or they want to leave, or they feel they can't handle it. So they become like in a depressed situation. So when I listen to you, I think that's a similar thing that we as the elder, I would say, could do, is just looking into the eyes of the other person, and maybe even just build in like a bit of a pause to let them know that you see them, right? That you understand, and that you see them before you go off into like a great talk about how things were different in the past and how you learned everything was hard and you have to just be hard and stuff like that.
Right.
How do you see that?
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I want to make it easier.
Cool.
The easy way to do that is to open your own heart. You don't even have to know how to connect with this person. When your heart's open, it happens intuitively. Mm-hmm. So I really like the topic of sort of the fragility of the young people, right? What happened in my understanding is that we actually developed, let's call it 20 years ago, we started allowing ourselves to have feelings. And we started developing language that became everyday. It's much easier for us to talk about heart space and feelings now. I never would have done that 20 years ago. And so it's wonderful that we've developed a lot of vocabulary and a lot of learning around social emotional learning, emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman started this movement around emotional intelligence and how important it is to understand emotion. That's wonderful. We've opened this door, and now the feelings are just pouring out, right? The other piece will come. It is coming. The other piece will come of now, how do we take responsibility for those feelings? Because the way it is right now, I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect here, but the way it is now is that if I have a strong feeling about something, maybe we use the word trigger, right? It's a trigger, and the other person is responsible for triggering me. The way we're continuing to shift is now I'm learning to take responsibility for my trigger, right? So we just haven't quite gotten there yet. We will. But one of the best ways to connect with younger folks is through encouragement. We want to give them the message, wow, you can do hard things. And people relate to encouragement. And I don't mean empty praise. I don't mean, oh, you're so pretty, or, I'm looking for concrete ways to say, I see your effort. I see your caring. I see your desires. And so we're able to put a lot of attention onto what we can celebrate, which is, it's beautiful that we can now talk about feelings. It's beautiful. Let's just keep the conversation moving in the right direction where we put our attention on what's good about that. And then rather than taking responsibility for each other's feelings, we can demonstrate how we're taking responsibility for our own. So I can tell you a story of how this plays out, and it's a bit controversial. A lot of the folks that I work with directly have experienced very intense interpersonal conflict, even to the point of interpersonal violence, domestic violence. And working with these folks, I help them see how they can take responsibility for their own feelings of safety in their body, right? Because so many of these people will tell me, I don't feel safe. I can't meet with this other person. We've had violence. I've been affected. I've had a broken bone. I've had financial abuse. We've had an emotionally abusive relationship for years. No way could I meet with that person. And in my work with them, I'm absolutely respectful about what they want and need, especially, in that moment. But as we work together, we start to discover what empowerment really is. And that our feelings of safety can actually be created in our own bodies. And we can become less dependent on the way other people behave for our own feelings of safety. And then we can very consciously create the boundaries that we need in order to be physically and emotionally safe going forward. And so I end up with a lot of people that end up wanting to have a conversation with that other person because they've learned to trust me, knowing that I understand their goals and needs. I'm going to have their back. I'm going to make sure that the other person is able to self-manage and not have a big reactive response, so that that person who's been injured, who has been a victim, can actually break out of a victim mindset and see that they can say and do new things, even with that person. Because a lot of the folks that I'm working with actually share a child with that person, and they are going to have ongoing contact. So it's very different than when there's an offense or an injury with someone where you're not going to have ongoing contact. But the idea is that we're learning to embrace this wide vocabulary we now have for feelings, keep the learning going, and then, okay, how do we take ultimate responsibility for what we think, feel, and do? But so many activists, let's bring this back to the activist community, where the person wanting to impart the information and persuade and engage is actually so activated in their own body that the fear is palpable.
Mm.
And it blocks the heart. It blocks the heart space. And it's only in that heart space that we can truly be intuitive and connecting in a way that's going to ultimately make huge change in the world.
Mm.
So we have to do our own work. So any activists, let's really ask the question, how can I be in my heart? How can I speak from my heart? Your head knows the information. The information's there. That's not the question. It's how can I position myself so that connection is possible? Because heart space welcomes heart space. And I'm not talking about changing the words of the conversation. I'm talking about changing the energy of the conversation.
Mm.
We're not changing the conversation to talking about something else so that we can have a heart-centered conversation. Let's talk about how our hearts can engage around the tough issues.
Right. I recently was at an event which was organized with Initiative of Change and the Inner Development Goals. So there were a lot of people from the Inner Development Goals community there that I knew, that I've had spoken to before just online, and we met now in first time in person. And what I feel there in this environment is this, but also online with the conversation I have with these people, is this ability to talk about feelings, right? But also to make space for these feelings, right? So sometimes we just feel, okay, we have a conversation, we're not going in the right direction, or not the right direction. We feel there is like a disconnect. We feel there's disconnect between each other. And then we say, okay, or it becomes just silent for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we go into the feelings of what's going on right there. And it has helped me so much recently, these changes, to see. I'm not saying I can do it right now, but I'm learning a lot from these conversations, how we can respond differently, right?
Yeah.
And I want to say one thing, because you talked about fear and how it's blocking the heart.
Yes.
I had this conversation with a friend at this event. We did these walks in the morning. It was in the mountains. It was early. And we talked about the changes that are going on in the world and the difficulties that are there, the conflicts that we talk about. Not just political, but in general, the conflict. So we asked each other, so do we feel that getting out of this situation right now is possible without a huge trauma, with a huge war or whatever? And I said, this is actually the one thing that I'm have a lot of fear for, that we need a war to move to the next situation, to move to a better future.
Right.
And I'm really scared of war. Not that I've ever been in a war, but the things that happen during war is just so terrible for humanity that I feel fear.
Feel the fear.
I really feel the fear of war. And I'm wondering, and maybe you can help me there, how I could not release, but relief maybe, or I'm not sure.
Unlock, open.
Yeah, so that I stay with the heart, and the fear doesn't block the heart. How could I do that?
I love your question. It's actually a very heart-centered question. And the wonderful news is that compassion is always the answer, right? Compassion for yourself, for the part of yourself that's feeling the fear. right? That fear is beautiful, it's caring, it's very important, right? It's a safeguard, right? That's protective. It's just that we have compassion ready at all times to walk with whatever other feelings we're feeling. So you can feel also compassion for the part of you that's feeling fear. At the same time, it can coexist with the fear. And what happens is when fear is bathed in compassion, fear relaxes.
Mm.
And when your fear relaxes, it's not a block, right? It's only a block when fear gets bathed in blame and we let ourselves have these big reactions and we think that our anger is justified, right? And we end up vilifying someone else rather than bringing compassion to ourselves, right? So there's nothing wrong with fear. It's it's good information. It's very legitimate. And the most exciting news is that this doesn't take a year-long course to learn this, right? So what I'm doing right now as I'm sitting here is I put my feet flat on the floor, right? So just moving my feet to be feeling the floor. I don't have shoes on right now, so I can wiggle my toes very easily, just sort of feeling the floor beneath my feet. So that's instant grounding. And that can happen in the midst of a heated conversation. We can put our feet on the floor and wiggle our toes. We can also do things like maybe we wear something that's meaningful to us, and I could fiddle with it, right? Or I could do this with my hands, and maybe this to me represents integrating our heart space, and I can just fold my hands on my lap. So I'm re-grounding, re-centering, remembering my values in the middle of that heated conversation. And what will happen with the fear? It'll relax and your heart opens. So one of my favorite spiritual teachers is Michael Singer. And he says the best way to open your heart is to never close it.
That sounds easy.
And other than never closing it, we can reopen our heart space in less than a second by being aware. Oh, I just noticed a shift in the energy. I'm feeling flat or I'm feeling disconnected. And we can develop habits, practices, go-to that we can do in an instant, right? One of the things I teach to some of the folks in New York City is, so my last name's Armstrong, right? And I like to talk about how we arm ourselves, right? Of course, it's a play. We don't need guns, right? But we can arm ourselves by doing this. You know, give yourself, remember that you have a body, okay? Right? Maybe we arm ourselves by crossing our arms and just remembering that we can protect ourselves energetically from others. One of my favorite arms, I'm putting my camera down to show I can do this and this at the same time. So I can be protected and also have a hand on my heart to remember my heart space. So I'm giving you these ideas that seem so, I don't know, they just seem so small, but that's all it takes to remember, oh, my heart is here. And as soon as our heart opens just a crack, our intuition flows, the energy flows, and we can trust the ideas that come. One of the fun things I do when I'm working with two or more people, maybe even a group that's heated, matter of fact, I'll be working with one this evening, is just name it. Oh, I just felt a shift in the energy. What did you notice? Just an invitation, it just shifts from a demand or even shifts out of a request to an offering or an invitation. that alone shifts the power dynamic. That invitation to share power, ooh, it is so impactful.
Mm.
So let's go back to the activist at the doorstep, right? Of someone they want to persuade or convince. I'm going to give you this information and you're going to say, oh, thank you for teaching me. I've changed. And now I'm going to support this cause and I'm going to give all my money to this cause, right? Or all my time and attention. And what happens is we come into that conversation guarded, maybe fearful, maybe feeling a little tough. Or maybe we start the conversation feeling completely open-hearted. But as soon as we experience resistance from the other person, we pull back, we resist, we guard our hearts. And what that's doing is actually giving our power away, right? Because we're letting their behavior and their energy control ours. Instead, what we want to do is daily practices. As soon as we wake up in the morning, all day long, working them into our day, where we remember that we have complete control over how we think, how we feel, and what we do. That includes what we say. And so if we build these practices into our everyday, then when that other person resists, we can see it as an invitation to soften ourselves rather than to become hard. Compassion again. If we can feel a little compassion for their resistance, we can keep our heart open. And we can say something completely different because we're thinking differently and we're feeling differently. So our job is to take full responsibility for how we think, feel, and act 24/7, all the time. It's yours. It's your responsibility to take charge. So you're really responsible for your power. Don't give your power away. Don't give your power away to that other person who's behaving like that, right? Keep your power in your heart center through these very simple practices that are simply a matter of habit.
Yeah. So
So
now,
so in conflict, we want to maximize our influence, maximize our power by claiming responsibility.
I'm not sure if I understood that last part. That's why I was silent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maximizing my power,
You're maximizing your influence,
right?
you're maximizing the impact of your interaction.
Right.
When you take full responsibility for how you think, how you feel, and what you do.
Right.
So if you give your power away when you let the other person control you, when they are defining you, right? How many times do you say or think, oh, they made me so mad, right? They only made you mad because you closed your heart. We have control of keeping our heart open, even in high conflict. And we do that. We can't just start that practice in the heat of the moment. This is something that has to become part of our daily habits so that we don't enter a conversation, right? So let's say, a lot of people get mad driving, right? When you start your car, thank the automaker that made a very safe car for you. Center yourself in the seat. Pay attention to what you're doing. Be grateful that you have a healthy body, that you can drive yourself somewhere, right? And then when someone behaves erratically on the road, you're much more likely to just back off, give them space. Notice that maybe they are, I don't know, experiencing something we can't imagine. We don't need to imagine. But then that compassion is just normal, natural, easy flow. We don't have to dig deep in our pockets to pull out some compassion. And by compassion, we're never making their behavior okay. We're not judging their behavior. We're just taking charge of how we want to feel. So I'm sort of supposing that we want to feel relaxed. That's how I like to feel. I like to feel relaxed and at ease. That's my preference, right? I like to have joy. I like to feel like a little bird, just enjoying life, right? Maybe you don't want to feel that way. A lot of people are, appreciate a lot of passion that comes out as anger because it feels good to care so much about a cause that it's worth getting angry about. I kind of like that too. I just don't want to live in that state all the time.
Right.
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 And so anger is great information about what we care about. It's really great about what feels fair to us and what doesn't feel fair. But our anger may actually make the situation worse because other people are much more likely to resist us when we're angry. So we want to look at maximizing our influence. So the question becomes, like, if I'm leading a group on this, I'm going to say, how can we appreciate and benefit from anger without alienating this group? Right? Because ultimately we want to make a connection where they're open to learning. So we just want to take control over things that maybe you didn't know you could control. A lot of people don't know you can actually control your feelings. A lot of people think feelings just come on us like a wave and we have no say over it. We absolutely have say over it.
Right. Again, a couple of doors that you opened for me. One is I like stoicism. So I like that, like, stoicism is like my engine, right? It's my operating system. So the idea of, I think the most important part, what I feel is important about stoicism, is that you can't control anything except for how you respond to things or to anything. So the response, my response is what I can control, is what I want to control, right? So I like that. And what I liked about what you just said, Amy, was about these habits that you can create to develop compassion, develop openness, develop listening with the heart, right? So I know the part about controlling myself, how I respond, but I like the addition of being able to show compassion, keep the heart open. So that was and then habits is another part that I really are interested in. So I like that you've made this so small that you can create like these habits so that you get used to responding in that way, like you just mentioned with your hands or with the car, how you get into the car and how you sit in the stove. So everything is just like creating these small things that you do so that it becomes like ingrained in your system that this is how you respond, and you feel that this is how I respond. And then I was thinking about the activists, right? So if I'm looking at the activists, like, for example, recently, they were like not destroying, but like throwing tomato sauce. Well, that's a couple of months ago against the paint. The paintings were protected with glass, so they knew that. So that was not the point. The point was they got attention, right? That was the whole point. Or like they painted something on the monument in the UK, the Stonehenge. Also, they had paint on there that was not violating actually the stones. It was just something that was temporarily on there. Again, it was for attention. And like what you just mentioned was also how, as activist, I like to bring it on myself, could be more compassionate to myself, to be able to understand the other person, to understand what I invoke with my action, or what happens if I do this, right? So I like that part a lot, to think about how, as activists, we could do something in a different way. At the same time, getting attention, but also speaking more from the heart than
Right.
from aggression or from anger.
I do think compassion is widely misunderstood, right?
Mm.
Compassion is not carrying around a baby kitten, right? To flood ourselves with oxytocin and just have this la la conversation about the good things in life, right? I love the statement from Mother Teresa, right? She says, if you're holding an anti-war rally, I don't want to come.
Mm.
If you are holding a rally for peace, oh, count me in, right? So it's this flip to focusing on what we do want rather than on what we don't want. There's a big energy shift right there. Be happy about what's coming because you have this beautiful vision of what you're creating and you're engaging others to join you. That's a very different energy. Then you can't do that, right? When we're pushing the wrong or the bad out, right? So compassion is not, it doesn't even have to be soft. It can be very meaty. It's just this state of knowing there's more that you don't know, that you really are a human being that recognizes our limitations, that knows we don't know anything about what's going to happen or what that other person is experiencing. It's really, I want people to understand that compassion is very, there's a lot of energy in compassion. It doesn't have to mean you're soft or you care any less about your cause. So let's bring the compassion in. I mean, look at the word itself, right? Compassion is passion with someone, compassion. So there's no less fuel there. It's greatly fueled. And so I just have a sense that sometimes when I talk about compassion, people think, oh, there's this nice lady over there that just likes to talk about babies and kittens, That's not it at all. It's that we recognize what our heart is capable of. It's huge. And we don't even need to change our words. We just change the energy behind the words. We're not changing our message. We're changing the impact and the influence of our message.
Okay. I love what you have brought so far, what you've shared and what I've learned. Just before we close, can you just give us one more tip of how I could learn or create habits of compassion?
Yeah. The best way to learn these habits is to experience safe spaces. So growing up in my first marriage, I did not have the safety I needed to learn to be authentic. So I learned to simply orchestrate my environment the best way I knew how to get my needs met. I did it poorly. I, ended up with a lot of pain in my body. I, was had a lot of, I was pretending to be happy, right? But it was false, right? It was false. I had a lot of things I enjoyed in my life, but I didn't have deep-seated joy, right? I was always anxious. I was hypervigilant for 45 years, right? Looking around me, right? To see what was going to happen in my environment and how I could, do whatever I needed to do to keep things as calm as possible, right? And so it took very little time once I had a friend be willing to say to me, I don't think you're saying what you really mean. Like she sort of called me out. And it gave me this sense of, well, of course I'm not saying what I really mean. It wouldn't go well if I did. And at that moment, when I was, separated from my husband, and I started creating these friendships with other women in my position, and we started being real. And it was so much fun. And we laughed all the time, and we could laugh at ourselves. So, my point is that we need safe relationships where we can practice noticing what's really happening. And as soon as we notice what's really happening, we can start to then work it into our vocabulary where we start to share it a little bit. And then we can start to match what habits are going to support me in staying in my authenticity. And then we can start to match more and more of our daily life with our authenticity, because really heart space is authenticity. We can't fake it, right? So enjoy your safe relationships. And some of our best relationships are with nature or with our pets or wherever it is. Just start to be real with what is my real experience here. And then I also believe strongly in groups, in really creating community around people where you feel like you can make mistakes and laugh about it. I like, my favorite bumper sticker is make new mistakes, right? Be where you can practice, making mistakes and instead of shutting down because of the mistake, where you can share it and laugh about it and say what you're going to try the next time. And that's really the success in my work, is we make everything an experiment. We don't know what's going to work. We just have to decide what we're going to try out. So it's really, I run a group for high conflict parents that have to parent with someone that's impossible. And in this group, we practice being real. I invite anyone in a high conflict relationship, join my group, reach out. But find a therapist, a coach, a friend that you can just start to practice what it really feels like to engage with an open heart.
I really thank you, Amy, for your the way that you've brought this conversation together with bringing it back to the topics that I find interesting, but also giving us like practical examples and tips to work on opening our hearts and staying open with our hearts and be compassionate. Stay full of passion, but be compassionate, right? So for me, it was a very interesting conversation. I hope it's the same for people who are listening. And then this conversation will just go forward.
Beautiful. I really appreciate it's very easy to connect with you, right? It was very easy for me to stay in my heart during this conversation and just let it flow, right? So it says a lot about you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.